So here's the thing that nobody wants to talk about after Silverstone. And honestly, it's way more important than any podium finish or championship points update. Ferrari just gave the entire Formula One grid a warning signal that most people completely missed because they were too focused on who crossed the finish line first. But if you've been paying attention to what's actually happening in Maranello, if you've seen the data points everyone's quietly discussing in the paddock, and if you understand how Formula One development actually works behind closed doors, then you know something significant is about to happen at Spa-Francorchamps. And here's the kicker. This upgrade package Ferrari is preparing could completely change the entire second half of the 2026 season in ways that competitors absolutely are not ready for. But first, there's one crucial detail about their rear wing design that explains everything. Now, I'm going to walk you through exactly what Ferrari is doing, why it matters more than people realize, and what it means for every other team on the grid who suddenly finds themselves looking in the rearview mirror. Stay with me because this story gets significantly more interesting than the usual upgrade announcements you'll see on social media. Let me start by saying this openly. I've been following Formula One for years, and I don't throw around words like game-changing lightly because the sport evolves constantly, and most innovations eventually get figured out by everyone else. But what Ferrari has apparently accomplished with this rear wing concept, this thing that's been getting called the Macarena Wing by fans and reporters across Italy, is genuinely different from the typical development cycle we usually witness. According to multiple reports emerging from technical sources in Italy, Ferrari isn't simply bringing another conventional aerodynamic package. They're doubling down on a design philosophy that's already become the most talked about innovation in Formula One this entire season, and they're preparing an evolved specification that could push the concept even further than anyone initially expected. Here's what makes this genuinely fascinating. Rival teams have been watching this wing solution with increasing concern for weeks now, and at first I think everyone dismissed it as just another technical experiment that would eventually get neutralized. But the more performance data that emerges, the more test data gets analyzed, the more it becomes clear that Ferrari may have actually found something genuinely special. The current version already provides a noticeable improvement in straight-line speed, and according to what sources close to the team are claiming, the engineers are working on an evolved specification that could increase the slot gap even further when the system activates. In practical terms, that means significantly less drag and potentially even more speed on the straights compared to what we're seeing right now. And this is where the story actually starts becoming interesting, because Spa-Francorchamps is literally one of the most power-sensitive circuits on the entire Formula One calendar, and any team that figures out how to dominate the straights there gains an absolutely massive performance advantage. Now, the thing I find genuinely interesting, and this is where my personal opinion actually differs from what most online commentators are saying, is that everyone's focusing entirely on the top speed gains, but I don't think straight-line speed is actually the most important part of this story. The real significance here is that Ferrari may have discovered a development path that competitors literally cannot easily copy. And honestly, that's worth way more than a few extra kilometers per hour on the straights. See, normally in Formula One, when one team introduces a successful innovation, the rest of the grid eventually catches up through whatever development cycle they're working through. That's just the natural cycle of how this sport operates. But this situation feels fundamentally different, and here's why. McLaren has reportedly explored similar concepts without achieving anywhere near the same level of success that Ferrari has demonstrated. Mercedes has shown relatively little interest in aggressively pursuing this particular avenue of development. Red Bull developed their own version of a similar concept, but, and this is important, recent races have exposed reliability concerns that have attracted significant attention from the FIA, leading to increased scrutiny of these advanced rear-wing systems. Meanwhile, Ferrari has managed to avoid those same problems entirely, and their design philosophy appears to be more complex, but also potentially more effective. Instead of focusing purely on creating a massive opening in the wing structure, Ferrari apparently prioritized smoother airflow management during activation and deactivation. And that might sound like a small technical detail, but in Formula One, these kinds of tiny tiny aerodynamic refinements often translate to massive performance advantages. What's remarkable is that Ferrari has taken a different engineering approach from everyone else, and that approach appears to be working better, which means competitors are facing a genuine challenge in terms of catching up because they're essentially playing catch-up in a direction they haven't necessarily invested heavily in. The team continues refining the concept and appears confident enough to invest even more development resources into it, which suggests Ferrari genuinely believes there's still substantial untapped potential within this design philosophy. And if Ferrari believes that, then every other team on the grid should probably be experiencing some legitimate concern. Here's another aspect of this story that raises some genuinely interesting questions: Ferrari's remarkable commitment to continuous development throughout the season. Throughout 2026, several team principals have quietly questioned how Ferrari keeps finding the budget for new upgrades under Formula One's cost cap regulations, because every single team operates under strict financial limitations that make major development programs increasingly difficult to justify. Yet, Ferrari continues introducing new components, new aerodynamic packages, new wing concepts, and new efficiency upgrades at a rate that honestly seems slightly unusual. Nobody is suggesting Ferrari is doing anything wrong, but it does raise an interesting question about whether Ferrari has simply become more efficient than everyone else when it comes to development and resource allocation. Because while some teams appear focused on saving their development cycle, Ferrari appears to be an entirely different course right now. And if Ferrari can maintain this rate, what we could be witnessing is genuinely significant. The idea that Ferrari has managed to master a complex and novel aerodynamic concept that competitors struggle to replicate, all while maintaining an incredible level of continuous improvement. It's this combination of factors that makes Spa such an incredibly exciting prospect. Because if things continue as they've been trending over the past few weeks, we might genuinely see a shift in the balance of power in the second half of the 2026 season. And honestly, that's the whole point of a Formula One development race. It's about finding that little edge that no one else saw coming, and it looks like Ferrari might have just found that.
Protecting resources and development budget for next year's championship car, Ferrari is still aggressively chasing performance gains in the current season, and that mindset could prove absolutely decisive when we're looking at the championship fight in retrospect. Here's the reality that people don't always appreciate about Formula One championships. They're rarely won by the fastest car at the beginning of the season, and actually, they're far more often won by the team that develops the fastest throughout the season and brings meaningful upgrades at the right moments. Right now, Ferrari looks like one of the few teams still finding meaningful performance gains in tangible ways, and that matters significantly more than people probably realize. Additionally, there's this fascinating element involving what's being called the exhaust wing configuration, and according to reports, Ferrari is evaluating whether to modify or even remove certain elements of this setup specifically for Spa. The reasoning is straightforward from an engineering perspective. The current configuration improves rear stability but may cost some engine power, and around Silverstone, Ferrari prioritized stability because that circuit contains numerous high-speed corners where rear confidence and predictability are genuinely critical factors. But Spa presents a completely different challenge entirely. The Belgian circuit fundamentally rewards raw straight-line speed over everything else, and if Ferrari decides to sacrifice a little stability in exchange for additional horsepower and improved straight-line performance, the result could be a car that becomes extremely difficult to overtake anywhere on that circuit. Think about that possibility for a moment. Imagine a Ferrari that already possesses competitive race pace suddenly gaining several additional kilometers per hour on the straights through a calculated engineering trade-off. Mercedes would genuinely struggle with a car that fast on straights they thought they could defend on. Red Bull would struggle because their entire strategy often depends on having speed advantages in specific areas where they can create gaps. Even McLaren could find itself under genuine pressure from a car that's just objectively faster in the areas where overtaking is most critical. This is precisely why I believe the Belgian Grand Prix could become one of the absolute most important weekends of the entire 2026 season. Not because it guarantees Ferrari victory, Formula One is too unpredictable for guaranteed anything, but because it will reveal whether Ferrari's development direction is genuinely superior to what everyone else is doing, or whether it's simply another promising upgrade that doesn't deliver the expected performance gains. If the upgrades work as advertised and Ferrari emerges from Belgium demonstrating clear advantages, the team could establish itself as the benchmark team for absolutely everything that happens in the second half of the season, and that's a powerful position to occupy. If they don't work, then much of the recent hype and excitement around this project simply disappears overnight, and we're back to a situation where everyone's equally competitive. Spa represents such a critical test for Ferrari's entire development philosophy and their confidence level heading into the remainder of 2026. There's also what I call the FIA factor that adds another layer of complexity to this entire situation. Whenever one team discovers a potentially game-changing innovation in Formula One, regulatory scrutiny inevitably follows because that's how the sport manages competitive balance. And the governing body has reportedly been monitoring these advanced wing concepts closely, particularly after problems and reliability issues experienced by other teams on the grid. Ferrari will naturally argue that their solution is fully compliant with existing regulations and fundamentally different from rival implementations in important ways, and the FIA may agree with that assessment. Or, alternatively, the FIA may decide that further clarification is necessary regarding how these systems operate and whether they're truly within the spirit of the current technical regulations. That uncertainty adds another genuinely interesting layer, because even if Ferrari gains a major performance advantage, there's no absolute guarantee that competitors will simply accept it without challenges or questions. Formula One history is full of examples where innovative designs eventually triggered technical directives, rule clarifications, or deeper FIA investigations. Think back to various examples from previous seasons where promising concepts got restricted or modified, so this situation has that potential as well. For now, though, Ferrari appears confident, and here's where I want to inject a bit of personal perspective, because confidence is actually something we haven't consistently associated with Ferrari during recent years, and that matters psychologically. Too often, the team has introduced upgrades that promised substantial performance gains, but delivered relatively little when it mattered. Too often, hopes have been raised through the season before reality intervened and brought everything back down to earth. This situation genuinely feels different though, and the reason is surprisingly simple. Ferrari's recent upgrades have actually worked in measurable ways. The performance gains have been visible on track. The data has supported the claims that engineers were making. The results have improved relative to previous weekends. That doesn't mean Ferrari has solved every competitive problem they face, not even close, but for the first time in what feels like a genuinely long period, there appears to be authentic momentum behind the entire project, and momentum in Formula One can be incredibly powerful and self-reinforcing. One successful upgrade leads to confidence throughout the organization. Confidence leads to better execution in future development cycles. Better execution leads to stronger results on track. Stronger results create genuine belief throughout the entire team. Suddenly, a team that looked potentially vulnerable or inconsistent becomes a genuine championship threat that everyone has to seriously account for in their own strategies. That's the trajectory Ferrari appears to be on, and that's why the Belgian Grand Prix matters so profoundly, not just as another race weekend, but as an actual chance to discover whether Ferrari has found something genuinely special that other teams don't have access to. It's a chance to see whether their rear wing concept can deliver another meaningful step forward in performance. It's a chance to learn whether the rest of the paddock should genuinely start worrying about the competitive situation heading into the
second half of the season. Because if Ferrari arrives at Spa and immediately demonstrates a clear, measurable straight-line advantage, not just in simulation, but in actual lap times and telemetry, then the conversation across the entire paddock will change overnight in profound ways. The questions being asked across the Formula One paddock will shift almost immediately if Ferrari's latest upgrade performs the way early indications suggest. Right now, the debate is centered around whether Ferrari has genuinely found a meaningful performance gain, or whether the optimism coming out of Maranello is simply another example of pre-race confidence being exaggerated by media speculation. But if the data from Spa confirms what Ferrari engineers believe they have achieved, then the entire conversation changes overnight. Instead of teams asking whether Ferrari has improved, the discussion becomes whether anyone else on the grid can realistically stop them. And that is a completely different situation, with completely different consequences for every rival team. When a team gains a few tenths of a second, competitors can often respond through setup adjustments, strategic flexibility, or smaller development packages. But when a team potentially unlocks a breakthrough concept that fundamentally improves aerodynamic efficiency, rivals are forced into a much more difficult position. They must decide whether to continue pursuing their own development path or divert valuable resources toward understanding and copying what Ferrari has discovered. That is why this story could become one of the defining narratives of the entire 2026 Formula One season. What makes the situation particularly fascinating is that Ferrari's potential advantage is not based on a flashy innovation that fans can instantly recognize. It is not a new engine architecture, a radical suspension system, or some obvious visual change that dominates headlines. Instead, it appears to be centered around a rear wing concept that has been developed quietly behind the scenes through months of wind tunnel testing, computational fluid dynamic simulations, and countless engineering revisions. Those are the kinds of developments that rarely receive mainstream attention. Fans naturally focus on drivers, overtakes, controversial steward decisions, and dramatic radio messages. Yet, Formula One history repeatedly shows that championships are often won by engineers long before they are won by drivers on Sunday afternoons. If Ferrari has genuinely solved an aerodynamic challenge that other teams are still struggling with, the implications could be enormous. A more efficient rear wing does not simply improve top speed, it can influence drag levels, tire management, energy deployment efficiency, cornering balance, and overall race consistency. The benefit spreads across multiple performance areas simultaneously. That is what makes aerodynamic breakthroughs so powerful and so dangerous for rival teams. For competitors like Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, and Aston Martin, the concern would not simply be that Ferrari has become faster. The concern would be that Ferrari has discovered a development direction that offers significantly greater long-term potential than anything currently being pursued elsewhere. And that possibility creates enormous pressure throughout the paddock. Team principals, technical directors, and aerodynamic departments would suddenly find themselves under intense scrutiny. Questions would emerge about whether development priorities need to change. Engineers who have spent months working toward one concept may suddenly be forced to evaluate whether their entire approach remains competitive. In Formula One, resources are limited even for the biggest organizations. Every hour spent pursuing the wrong direction can become incredibly costly over the course of a championship battle. What makes Spa such an important test is that it provides one of the most demanding aerodynamic examinations on the entire calendar. The circuit combines long, high-speed straights with some of the fastest corners in Formula One. A package that performs well there usually reveals genuine aerodynamic quality rather than track-specific strengths. If Ferrari can demonstrate a measurable advantage at Spa, it will be far more difficult for rivals to dismiss the performance as a one-off result. The data gathered during practice sessions, qualifying, and the race itself will be studied obsessively. Engineers from every team will analyze speed traps, sector times, tire degradation patterns, and telemetry estimates. They will be searching for evidence that confirms whether Ferrari's claimed gains are real or whether expectations have been overstated. And perhaps the most intriguing aspect of this entire story is that the true impact may not be visible immediately. Even if Ferrari dominates at Spa, the bigger question is whether the advantage can be sustained across multiple race weekends. Formula One is filled with examples of teams introducing upgrades that look spectacular during one event before gradually losing effectiveness as competitors adapt. The difference between a successful upgrade and a championship-defining innovation is consistency. That is the standard Ferrari must meet. If this rear-wing concept continues delivering performance at a variety of circuits, then the championship landscape could change dramatically. Rival teams may find themselves trapped in a difficult cycle where Ferrari continues extending its advantage while everyone else struggles to understand how to respond. Once a team gains momentum in Formula One development, that momentum can become incredibly difficult to stop. History has shown this repeatedly. The most dominant eras in Formula One rarely begin with a dramatic announcement or a single shocking race result. They often begin with one technical breakthrough that appears relatively minor at first, but gradually reveals itself to be significantly more important than anyone initially realized. By the time competitors fully understand what happened, the championship battle has already shifted. That possibility is exactly why so many people inside the paddock are paying close attention to Ferrari right now. The battle for the 2026 Formula One Championship may not ultimately be decided by driver errors, pit stop execution, safety car timing, changing weather conditions, or even race day strategy. Those factors will still matter, of course, but they may not be the decisive element. Instead, the championship could ultimately be shaped by engineering decisions made months ago inside Ferrari's technical department, choices developed quietly in wind tunnels, validated through simulation tools, and refined through relentless experimentation. The general public may never fully see those moments.
No television cameras inside every design meeting. Fans never witness the countless simulations, calculations, and failed concepts that eventually lead to a breakthrough. Yet those hidden processes often determine who lifts the trophies at the end of the year. Spa will provide the first genuinely meaningful answers. It will tell us whether Ferrari has merely improved or whether they have uncovered something far more significant. Whatever the outcome, the consequences will extend far beyond a single race weekend. The result could influence development strategies, championship expectations, and the competitive balance of the entire second half of the season.